Okay, today we begin not with answers, but with noise. Think about the last time your mind was truly still. Success, after all, often feels like a checklist of correct responses. But ancient philosophy points in another direction, not toward answers, but toward inquiry, toward the kind of questioning that doesn't end with certainty, but opens into depth. His famous phrase, "The unexamined life is not worth living," wasn't an insult. It was an invitation to live awake, to question what we think we know, to stop moving on autopilot. And the Stoics, they transformed this into daily practice. Journaling, reflection, piercing, no notifications, no news, no urge to fix, achieve, reply. Jnana yoga begins there, not with an answer, but with a refusal to assume. It asks the practitioner to investigate not only the world but the self, not to accumulate beliefs, but to dissolve what is false. And for that, one must slow down, sit, breathe, observe. The Stoics understood this too. You realize that much of what you chased was never yours to begin with, and much of what you feared was only a shadow. True clarity comes from discomfort, from sitting with the unknown, from asking, what if I'm wrong? The Stoic Epictetus taught that philosophy begins not with the study of texts, but with noticing your reactions. He urged students to ask, am I disturbed because of what happened, or because of the story I told myself about it? That it is not meant to be understood through logic, but through inquiry. We can't control what happens, only how we think about it. So instead of asking, why did this happen to me? They suggest asking, what can I learn from this? What quality is being called forth in me right now? These are not passive questions. They are active engagements with reality, and they reframe every experience, especially the painful ones. A teacher might ask a student, who are you without your name? Our technologies reward speed, not depth. Social media teaches us to respond, not to question. And yet, the power of questioning remains. It's quiet, but persistent. It lives in moments of hesitation, in your inbox, in traffic, in small frustrations. Every situation becomes a mirror, every reaction an opportunity, not to perfect yourself, but to observe yourself. And in that observation, to remember, you are not the roles you play. You are not your successes or failures. You are something deeper, more spacious, something revealed not by answers, but by the courage to keep asking. It whispers in the space between reaction and response. And if you follow it gently, it can lead you home, not to certainty, but to understanding. Who are you without your role? Who watches the thoughts in your mind? These are not puzzles. They are invitations. All it takes is a pause, a breath, and a question that rises from sincerity. Am I living in alignment with what matters most? That one question, asked daily, reshapes everything. Not immediately, not loudly, but deeply. Not to solve, but to soften. To surrender the need to define and instead, to perceive. That question alone can shift a life. This is not detachment born of numbness, it's clarity born of understanding. Jnana yoga asks you to sit with your thoughts, not to fight them, not to follow them, but to look at them. Gently, repeatedly, until their edges dissolve, until the core of awareness beneath them becomes clear. The Stoics called this the logos, the inner order of the universe that could be felt. If one were calm enough to perceive it, both traditions valued silence. But not the silence of escape, the silence of precision. You begin to see things as they are, not as you wish them to be. And in that seeing, something inside you relaxes. You don't need a robe or a book, you just need a moment. When you pause before reacting, when you reconsider before assuming, when you wonder instead of judging, these small acts are doorways. Each one says, I do not know everything. And that's okay. In that humility, wisdom enters. To them, the highest wisdom was not about learning new truths. It was about removing false impressions. Perception, not knowledge, was the root of suffering. It opens the space where freedom begins. And both Socratic and Stoic inquiry help us do just that, not by giving us better answers, but by guiding us to clearer questions. Beliefs about success, failure, worth, and identity that we pick up from family, culture, advertising. At night, Marcus Aurelius asked himself, what did I do today that was unnecessary? Where did I act from impulse rather than reason? Was I led by my values or by my ego? This was not guilt, it was clarity, a gentle, honest scan of the inner world. What had entered, what had stayed, what could be, let go. The goal wasn't perfection, it was perception. You must achieve this to be valuable. You should fear this. Chase that. Compare yourself to those. These are not facts. They are mental noise dressed up as certainty. Jnana yoga encourages us to ask, is this true? How do I know? And most importantly, who am I without this belief? It's a dismantling, not a construction, a returning, not an escaping. In this modern rhythm of swipes, alerts, and deadlines, we've grown allergic to silence and maybe, without realizing it, afraid of questions that can't be Googled. You were probably taught from a young age to seek answers, the right ones. Not what should I get done, but what is truly necessary today. What am I clinging to that no longer serves me? If this were my last morning, would I spend it this way? Jnana Yoga treats every moment as a portal to insight, but only if approached with sincerity. The questions must be real, not rhetorical, not dramatic, just open, simple, honest. The ancient Indians called it Jnana Yoga, the path of knowledge, not gained through memorization, but through lived inquiry, through stripping away what is not true, rather than clinging to what seems right. It's not intellectual trivia. It's a spiritual practice, a deep inner seeing. Socrates called it the examined life. You might wonder, how is this relevant now? Because in a world of instant opinions and constant feedback, asking a sincere question is revolutionary. It breaks the trance. So today, we explore Jnana via Stoic and Socratic, questioning a path that doesn't rush, doesn't force, and doesn't entertain shallow certainty. A path where the mind softens, the ego quiets, and something deeper begins to listen. We begin not by knowing, but by wondering. Not by defining the self, but by gently asking, who am I? Beneath all this noise, most people don't stop to ask why they live the way they do. It's not that they don't care, it's that the momentum of daily life rarely gives space for questioning. You wake up, you check your phone, you go to work, fulfill responsibilities, respond to messages, push through fatigue, and somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a quiet hum. Is this really what I want? But that question is inconvenient. So it's buried beneath meetings, plans, obligations. We call it productivity. But sometimes, it's just the art of distraction, the avoidance of reflection. In ancient philosophical traditions, that hum, is this really what I want, was not ignored. It was invited. What are false impressions? They are stories we inherit without question. The Stoics offered their own toolkit for dismantling illusions. One of the most powerful was a daily practice of Imagine waking up each day, not to a to-do list, but to a set of questions. A curious thing happens when you begin to question honestly. You start to need less. The clutter of desires fades. The pressure to prove yourself loosens its grip. In our time, clarity is often mistaken for confidence, but the sages of old knew. Confidence without examination is arrogance. We tend to think our thoughts are reality, but they are interpretations, mental habits shaped by years of reinforcement. To practice questioning in daily life is to become a philosopher in the truest sense, not as a profession, but as a way of being. There is a phrase from the Chandogya Upanishad that says, Tativa Masai thou art. Many of us chase a kind of control over life. We want to be certain, prepared, right? But the Stoics remind us, control is limited. The modern world does not encourage this kind of reflection. You don't have to abandon your responsibilities to practice this. You can begin while brushing your teeth, walking to the train, drinking your coffee. And so, the path of Jnana and Stoic inquiry begins right here in the ordinariness of daily life. Socrates never wrote a single book. He didn't build a school, publish ideas, or seek titles. His method, later called the Socratic method, was deceptively simple. Ask a question, then ask again, and again, until the structure collapses or reveals something deeper. Socrates believed that admitting ignorance was the beginning of wisdom. I know that I know nothing, he famously said. He replied, no. But the self, when known, is immortal. But their inquiries pointed in the same direction. Both saw the danger of living by unexamined beliefs. Some came from Greece, others from India. A recently unearthed papyrus fragment, now preserved in Cairo, bears a curious title written in Greek. Logos meets Atman. It appears to be a dialogue, a fictional but inspired conversation between a Stoic philosopher and a Vedantic teacher. Epictetus, born a slave in the Roman Empire, had no wealth, no status, no protection. And yet he became one of the most influential Stoic teachers in history. He didn't write either. His student Arian recorded his teachings. Epictetus taught that freedom has nothing to do with circumstance. It begins when you realize that your thoughts, not the world, determine your experience. Remember Matre asking her husband about the nature of immortality. Remember Epictetus, once a slave, now free in his mind. They didn't agree on everything, but they all began with the same gesture. A question. Not to prove, not to persuade, but to wake up. He urged his students to practice inner questioning relentlessly. What part of this is under my control? Am I disturbed by the event or by my opinion of it? The Stoic asks, how can you know the self if the self cannot be seen? Like the athlete or the musician, the philosopher had to practice every day, especially in difficulty. He encouraged students to rehearse adversity in their minds. What if I lose my job? What if my reputation is harmed? What if I die tomorrow? These were not morbid exercises. They were methods of resilience, of refining perception, and at the center of each was the question, what am I truly afraid of, and is it real? The sage replies, just as one knows the wind by what it moves. In both traditions, True transformation doesn't begin with belief, it begins with inquiry, the willingness to face discomfort, uncertainty, and contradiction without flinching, to examine one's habits, values, and attachments, and to let go of what no longer holds truth. This is not passive self-help, it is courageous dismantling, a kind of inner archaeology. You don't build a new identity, you unearth what has always been there. Both trusted that truth wasn't imposed, it was revealed through sincere questioning. Socrates walked through that doorway every day. So did the rishis of the forests, and in doing so, they preserved something precious in a world that often moves too fast. The space to wonder, the space to not be sure, the space to listen for a deeper voice within. In every era, there have been people who risked their lives, reputations, or comforts not to preach, but to question. They remind us that the search for truth is not always safe, but it is always sacred. Others argue it reflects real dialogues that occurred in early Alexandria, where Hellenistic and Indian philosophies briefly intersected. Either way, it testifies to a timeless curiosity, a shared belief that the deepest truths require asking the hardest questions, not to win debates, but to lose illusions. This convergence wasn't just philosophical. Centuries later, it became literal. After Alexander the Great's campaign into India, trade and dialogue between Greek and Indian cultures increased, and along those ancient routes, ideas flowed like rivers meeting. Their conversation wasn't about religion. It was about the search for something unshakable beneath change. This spirit of inquiry, peep open, tireless, is what defines Jnana. And like Socrates, many of these teachers warned against blind belief. Neti neti, they said, not this, not that. The truth could not be captured in words. It had to be realized. This was not it was intellectual humility, the kind that opens space for real insight. And for this, he was executed, accused of corrupting the youth and dishonoring the gods. Instead, he walked through the bustling streets of Athens, pausing at marketplaces, gymnasiums, and temples not to speak, but to ask, because to him, a life without questioning wasn't life, it was mere survival. His final words, spoken calmly before drinking hemlock, were not of revenge or regret. They were of mystery. We can never be sure whether death is not the greatest of all blessings. Even in death, he continued to question, and perhaps that is why his voice still echoes not as dogma, but as invitation. What is justice? What is courage? Do you really know what you claim to know? He unsettled people not by insulting them, but by inviting them to examine the foundations of their beliefs. And this made many uncomfortable. After all, most people don't want to be questioned. They want to be agreed with. Socrates offered neither comfort nor agreement, only clarity. He called himself a midwife of the soul, not one who gives birth to truth, but one who helps others do it for themselves. At his trial, he was offered the chance to stop questioning, to save his life by remaining silent. He refused. Meanwhile, in the forests and ashrams of ancient India, seekers sat before teachers, not to memorize, but to ask. The Upanishads, written around the 8th century BCE, are not scriptures in the traditional sense. They are conversations between students and masters, between the self and the soul. The most famous question was simple. Who am I? It was repeated like a mantra, not to get a quick answer, but to strip away layers of identity. Not name, not profession, not role. Beneath all labels, what remains? One of these teachers, Yainavakya, was asked by his wife Maitreyi. Thousands of miles apart, Socrates and the sages of India had never met. In the 3rd century BCE, the Library of Alexandria became a sanctuary for scholars from across the known world. Scholars still debate the origin of this fragment. Some believe it was an imaginative exercise, perhaps written by a Greek student fascinated with Indian ideas. One such illusion is power. To Epictetus, philosophy wasn't an abstract pursuit, it was training. The echo between Jnana yoga and Stoicism grows louder here. There is a peculiar kind of strength in saying, I don't know, not as an excuse, but as a doorway. So next time you feel the itch to react, to explain, to be right. Remember, Socrates walking barefoot in the Athenian sun. In some cultures, to question is not just intellectual, it is sacred. In ancient India, students approaching a teacher didn't begin by asking for answers. They began by learning how to sit, how to breathe. Their version of inquiry was disciplined, almost monastic. Marcus Aurelius journaled every morning and evening, not for productivity, but for perception. Seneca recommended writing letters to friends, not for socializing, but for sharpening thought, that it already existed within the self, and that the task was not to acquire, but to uncover. In both traditions, the question was a ritual, a ceremony, not to fill the mind, but to purify it. It was not just about finding meaning, but creating space for it to reveal itself. Others believe it was ceremonial, a mantra used in private reflection. There's no consensus, but what captivates scholars is how clearly it blends two traditions, once thought unrelated. Atman, the true self, in Indian philosophy. Today, questions are often seen as interruptions, obstacles. But what if they are doorways? What if every why is an initiation? Every what if, a kind of pilgrimage, not outward, but inward. The sage's silence was once the poet's pause. Across traditions, there was always a place for the question. It was not secondary, it was central. In tribal rituals, elders asked young initiates, "What do you fear?" In Zen temples, students were struck with riddles not to solve, but to feel. In Christian mysticism, silence was the highest prayer. All of them, in their own way, revered what could not be spoken, only experienced. Doctrine, a word, more familiar in the West. And that strange final phrase, the silence of a question not yet spoken. What does that mean? Perhaps it means that true inquiry begins not in the mind, but in the soul. And yet, somewhere along the arc of history, these rituals faded. She gave riddles, and Socrates, after visiting her, did not return with certainty, but with deeper humility. He realized the wisest person is not the one who knows the most, but the one who knows how to ask, and when to stop answering. Jnana and Stoicism. It seems, both remember that there is wisdom in unknowing and strength in silence. So if you find yourself wrestling with a question that has no clear answer, don't rush to close it. Let it breathe, let it ripen, let it echo. Perhaps it is not a problem to be solved, but a doorway to walk through. Perhaps, in that quiet space of not knowing, something deeper is already waiting for you. The modern world does not pause for sacred questioning. We are trained to answer quickly, respond immediately, optimize everything. The art of slow reflection is lost, replaced by speed, noise, efficiency. But traces remain. In overlooked customs, in forgotten manuscripts, in strange artifacts that hint at something more ancient than logic alone. Epictetus guided students to rehearse difficulty in the imagination, preparing not just with ideas, but with inner posture. A stone tablet, inscribed in a mix of Sanskrit and Greek, bore a line that still confounds scholars. It read, "Atman cannot be grasped through doctrine, only through the silence of a question not yet spoken." In southern Egypt, in the ruins of an ancient Greco-Buddhist settlement, a fragment of a clay scroll was found half-burned, written in a mix of Pali and Attic Greek. Its line spoke of a path not walked, which leads inward, and warned of teachers who give answers too quickly. Again, no author, no school. Just echoes, whispers, evidence that in different corners of the ancient world, a quiet understanding bloomed. Truth begins where certainty ends. No name, no context, just that single sentence. Who wrote it? A traveler? A student of both worlds? No one knows. But the words feel timeless. They pulse with the same rhythm found in both Socratic and Vedantic thought. This daily rhythm was a kind of sacred rehearsal, not for a test, but for life itself. How to become quiet enough for the right questions to rise. In certain schools, like Advaita Vedanta, there were no lectures, just one question. Who am I? Asked over and over, until the illusion of separation faded. This wasn't repetition for memory, it was repetition for revelation. The goal was not information, but transformation. Even the setting was part of the practice. Learning did not happen in classrooms, but under trees, near rivers, in silence. The student wasn't trying to impress the teacher. The teacher wasn't trying to deliver truth. Together, they were peeling back illusion. The Sanskrit term, ravana, means deep listening. Not to sound, but to truth. It requires stillness, receptivity, humility. You don't force truth into the mind. You create the conditions for it to appear. The Stoics, too, believed in structure not just of the mind, but of practice. One of the lesser-known Stoic practices was premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Every morning, practitioners would imagine all that could go wrong. Injury, failure, death, disgrace, not to invite fear, but to disarm it. And afterward, they would ask, if this happens, what in me remains unchanged? This was not pessimism, it was radical preparation. And like the Indian question, who am I? It pointed toward something unshakable, something beneath identity, reputation, and control. These practices, though culturally different, were united by one thing, the belief that truth was not taught, but remembered. One such artifact was discovered in central Turkey, buried beneath a collapsed mountain. Some speculate that the tablet was part of a larger text, now lost. There are other mysteries. These artifacts remind us that questioning was once ritualized, protected, nurtured, even revered. This reframing changes everything. It turns even small acts, journaling, silence, doubt into sacred gestures. Not of weakness, but of reverence. The philosopher's robe was once the monk's robe. Even the myths spoke of this. The oracle at Delphi did not give answers. Modern life rewards speed. From the moment we wake up, we're thrust into a world that values rapid responses, instant decisions, and constant output. Notifications shape our day before we even open our eyes. To pause, to reflect, to not know. These are now countercultural acts. Jnana Yoga teaches that truth does not rush, it waits. It's not hidden, but obscured beneath assumptions, fears, and noise. The modern world offers infinite opportunities to question mindfully. The next time you scroll endlessly on your phone, stop, ask, am I choosing this or escaping something? What need is this fulfilling? What am I avoiding by staying distracted? Before any important action, sending an email, making a decision, reacting in conversation, take a single breath and ask, what am I serving in this moment, ego or wisdom? But the deepest inquiry happens in small, invisible moments. Choosing not to argue. Social media creates curated identities. Algorithms feed our biases. It becomes hard to know what is truly mine and what is borrowed. Here, a Jnana question cuts through illusion. Whose voice is this in my head? Is it a parent, a brand, a fear disguised as logic? To ask this with sincerity is to reclaim agency, where your power doesn't come from being right, but from being real, where your authority is not force, but integrity. This is the spirit of modern Jnana, to walk through life not as a knower, but as a seeker. Calm, clear, quietly, brave, not by asserting control, but by removing confusion. It's not about having no influences, it's about recognizing them. The practice isn't about perfection, it's about remembering, returning, beginning again each time with greater honesty, and every moment offers that chance. The Jnana yogis showed us that beyond every identity, fear, and desire there is a deeper self, untouched by change. These two traditions, oceans apart, whisper the same truth. The path to freedom does not begin with having the right answer, but with daring to ask the right question. A question asked sincerely is a form of inner light. It shows us, not what to do, but who we are. They shape not only how you live, but how you relate to others. In a world that seeks quick fixes, to wonder is powerful. When was the last time you stopped chasing answers and trusted that not knowing might be the start of something sacred? The next time you feel lost, overwhelmed, reactive, pause. Ask gently, what am I really serving here? You don't need to answer right away. The asking is already enough. Thank you for walking this journey with us. See you in the next meditation. When you write a single, honest question in your journal, when you hesitate before speaking, when you notice a belief and ask, is this still true for me? You are practicing Jnana. You are living stoically. You are remembering that the most valuable tools are invisible. Awareness, intention, attention, these are the instruments of a life examined. But the one who pauses, who wonders, who knows that truth can't be rushed, that insight unfolds, and that the right question, asked sincerely, is already the beginning of freedom. Instead of judging, you listen. Instead of reacting, you wonder. Instead of assuming, you ask, what is really needed here? A world where answers are abundant, but clarity is rare. Along the way, we stepped into quieter spaces through the streets of ancient Athens, the forests of India, the scrolls of vanished libraries. In those spaces, something unexpected emerged. The realization that knowledge is not accumulation, but reduction. That truth is not found in more data, but in fewer illusions. And that wisdom begins, not with certainty, but with the courage to ask. And often, the answer is not more action, but more space. This is the paradox. Questioning deeply doesn't make you hesitant. It makes you steady. You become less certain but more centered, less reactive but more responsive. And that change, though subtle, alters everything. Your presence becomes a refuge. Your stillness, a kind of clarity. Not because you know more, but because you carry less illusion. The question is always there, quietly waiting. Am I awake to this moment? Am I living by truth or habit? Sitting in silence instead of seeking distraction. Changing a habit, not by force, but by understanding its roots. What surfaces? Boredom, restlessness, guilt, and beneath that, silence, awareness, insight. These are not punishments. They are invitations. The discomfort is not a flaw. It is the edge of transformation. Just as fire reveals gold, solitude reveals truth. If you stay with the question long enough, the noise clears. What remains is real. Jnana Yoga reminds us, the self is not found in grand revelations, but in subtle realizations. Before a presentation, ask, am I performing or communicating? In conflict, ask, am I defending myself or defending clarity? These are not easy questions, but they return you to presence. They shift your intention from control to alignment, and they allow your actions to arise from wisdom, not reactivity. And the Stoics would agree. For them, daily life was the training ground of the soul. It only takes seconds, but that micro-moment creates a space where clarity can enter. In that space, the unconscious becomes conscious, and that shift is more transformative than any advice. These aren't judgments. They are gentle lights, turning awareness inward, toward the habits that often go unnoticed. And through that, noticing the possibility of change emerges. The Stoics taught something similar. That clarity arises not when we master the world, but when we master how we relate to it. Each morning, before checking messages, write 3 questions, not goals, but inquiries, not what will I do today, but what am I truly responsible for? Where might I react unconsciously? What truth am I avoiding? At night, review them, not for achievement, but for honesty. Over time, you'll notice a shift, not in how much you do, but in how you are while doing it. And that begins not with reaction, but with reflection. Messages, schedules, metrics. The pace is relentless. The faster we respond, the more in control we appear. But under the surface, many feel not because they lack information, but because they lack orientation. In a world obsessed with answers, we rarely ask if we're chasing the right questions. This is where the ancient path of inquiry becomes radical again. Let's say you're stuck in traffic, late for a meeting, heart racing. The impulse is frustration, blame, panic, but a Stoic pause would ask, what here is under my control? Not the traffic, not the clock, but your breath, your posture, your thoughts. A Jnana pause would go further. Who is this I that feels late? Am I my schedule, or the awareness witnessing it? These questions aren't escapist. They're grounding. They return you to a deeper place of perspective. We don't need a forest or monastery to practice this. One practical technique comes from modern Stoics. Keep a daily question journal. Another method, borrowed from both traditions, is called the sacred pause. We often look for meaning in big moments, career changes, relationships, life crises. Still, the modern world brings unique challenges. Another helpful tool is a digital fast, not just turning off your phone, but sitting in the discomfort that arises without it. In workplaces where performance and speed dominate, these practices can feel out of place. But even here, inquiry has power. Teachers, leaders, artists, parents, anyone can live this way. Not as a doctrine, but as a discipline. A kind of invisible elegance. You may still stumble, get frustrated, forget to question. That's okay. In time, these questions stop being techniques. They become part of you. A way of moving, seeing, choosing. So in the digital age, full of noise, stimulation, and overwhelm, the questioner becomes rare and precious, not the one with the quickest reply. We began this journey in the chaos of modern life with buzzing phones, overloaded calendars, endless information. The Stoics taught us to question our judgments, to strip away what is not essential, and to meet life with equanimity. In a world that glorifies reaction, to pause is radical. So when was the last time you sat in silence? Not to meditate, not to achieve clarity, but simply to wait for a question to arise on its own.